and sort of work through that and provide that. To your second question, this is a re-benchmarking year at the state. They have done the re-benchmarking with respect to the LCI, and report we're up 0.8 again, which means that we do have the highest local composite index of that's available. So 80% of our budget for schools should come from the locality. I think it's also important, sort of to your point, Councilman Snyder, is that in here you see 82%, and that 82%, or I'm sorry, 82.7% really speaks to, I think, the value that you all and the school board hold in our schools, and that we exceed what is required in the standards of quality. If we were to, the other interesting question, and I'm not certainly meaning to put a question on the table for us to resolve, but what would the true cost be if we only met the standard of quality? Because I think if we met only what the standards of quality asked for with respect to numbers of social workers, school counselors, psychologists, teachers, and the like, our costs would come down rather significantly. And I think it's because you all have such a great commitment to our public schools.
Are there other questions on the city council side?
So, Mr. Mayor, I just had a follow-up with regard to Mr. Snyder. That's okay. Ms. Litton and I had the pleasure of attending a Virginia School Board Association legislative update this past fall, and they did talk about the LCI. And it's exactly what you're saying is, what the appetite is for lobbying our elected officials and getting that changed. And apparently that's a long-standing non-starter. But it comes up every year that people talk about it, and yeah, something needs to be done about it, and it's not equitable, but every year I guess the legislators kind of throw up their hands and say, not going to touch that one. So certainly I think that it is something that we should continue to pursue. It is something that I know that the Virginia School Board Association is also aware of, and our lobbyists and our various legislative affairs people were working on it, but unfortunately it's not something that appears to be anywhere close to near on the table.
Sure. I guess I'm not surprised that others who are benefiting significantly from this want to preserve, but I do think that when you get something like this that has such extreme effects, and those extreme effects become more extreme over the years and less based on economic realities, then I think it's time to revisit. Now, will others agree? Perhaps not, but the conversation is not going to start unless we advocate that it starts, it seems to me, in my opinion. Thanks. And thanks for all the effort. But I do think, regardless of that, it's helpful for the public to know that a lot of these costs that we're incurring locally, some we volunteer to do, got that, but others are imposed by a state formula, which is frankly bizarre.
If I could, since we're kind of crosses over to legislative, there is always the discussion of looking at the LCI, but until there's a new, larger pie, it will never really change in the General Assembly because somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. Regionally, for all of Northern Virginia, what you'll see I'm proposing for our legislative program, and it's not inconsistent with school needs, is to really look at the cost of competing adjustment because that impacts Northern Virginia, and so we'd have a bigger impact if that got changed at all. Support positions, so that is something that I'll recommend for your legislative program that we try to push this year, consistent with our delegation, because the LCI is going to be a long time, and I don't see it happening in this session.
I think what Ms. Mister said is absolutely right on, and something that Ms. Litton and she's been working really hard with our delegates on too, is that whole notion of the support cap that was put into place during the recession, that really caps the amount of funding that can go to social workers, school psychologists, and the like to support our students. We need that cap lifted, and I think that there is some will this year. I don't think it's a big surprise that we're going to see some things happen. I think the legislature this year that we hope will be good for education. Lifting that support cap certainly would be good, and could potentially have some positive influence from a revenue perspective for the state.
Other, Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing policy ask that you guys have put in front of legislative as it relates to that?
Yeah, you have our legislative package, I think,
Yes.
as part of tonight's presentation.
Specific related to LCI?
No, we have not added that to our legislative
Yeah,
package.
whatever correspondence you guys have in the past. And it's just curious to me too. When you look at Alexandria, you look at Arlington County, who admittedly carry a lot more weight than we do. The legislature, just given the size, that the proportion state versus local is similar, and I understand why it's an LCI, but you would think, especially with the amount of economic development taking place in Alexandria and Arlington, this might be the time to start putting pressure on our legislatures to revisit that. So, again, I'd like to see what asks and kind of what evidence and information have been put in front of them so we can start to pursue that, because it does seem quite often a time for revisit. So if you guys have anything you've seen in the past, things that you've liked in the conferences and whatnot, of course I'd like to see this. And then, just my own edification, the increase in students to 128, I feel like I may have asked this last year, what was the reason that Ellison had an influx? And I'm starting to look at these numbers through our audit, the number of increases and calls for service and things like that, and looking at this slide where you had, no, not this one, there was another slide where you had an unexpected increase of 128 students. Oh, I'm sorry, outflow of 128 students.
Why was it?
You know specifically.
I don't specifically know why. I could perhaps ask my colleagues and get back to you.
Yeah. I'm just curious to know why.
So,
I was there remiss.
historically, the biggest swings have been in right. And so
State
sometimes
Department.
there have been political changes, and so the State Department has brought back a large number of people, and there's been massive upswing in students in Lakewood, and sometimes there's been a flow out. So it depends. It's less from single-family homes and more from the larger apartment complexes, particularly Oakwood, because of the nature of the housing.
One of those years in Egypt, I think that we had a big outflow or inflow through the Arab Spring 3 or 4 years ago.
Just one question. So the number, now that we're on the numbers, so the September 2019 enrollment number was what? How many kids do we have in school right now?
Which slide are you referencing?
I'm not.
Oh.
I was hoping it was on a slide, but I don't think it is. So.
Yeah. Is the actual 2658?
So 2658, and your projection for how many you're going to have in September 2020 is?
Our projection was 2669, so we were off by 11, but that's actually not completely accurate because we did make an adjustment to the projection in kindergarten, and we're more closely aligned to that than the 11 that it shows.
Okay, and so the comparison between September 2018 and 2019, what was the number in September 2018? The actual.
So the actual was 2678,
2678.
2645.
2678 down to 2645,
2658.
and this September we were back up 2658. So you're down 20 students over the last 2 years from 18 to 20. And your projection for September 2021 is?
It's back one slide. We're looking at 2694.
That's the 2694. Just that includes Jesse Thackeray preschools.
It's 2698. We're going to go up at Thackeray by a few more.
Okay, so you're using the top line. Okay. So in terms of percentage, let's say things played out according to your projection, you'd go up from 2658 to 2698. What percentage is that? 40 students out of 2658 is that the right? Is that the right denominator to use? 1.5.
I suppose it's the right denominator. I
1.5%. Okay. Thanks.
Now, one of the things that I think I'd like to just make clear, if I can, is those 40. We don't know the nature and the needs of those 40 kids. So it could be 15 ESOL kids, and it could be 10 kids in poverty, and it could be 12 special ed kids and 8 regular ed kids. And each of those come with very unique needs.
That's why they pay us the big bucks, because you're obviously right. We don't know. That's why they pay you the big bucks too, trying to adjust to those. Because in a small system, a few kids makes a big difference. I understand that.
Absolutely.
Just a quick follow-up question. In terms of needs, does that affect the amount of money that comes from state? Is it designated special versus general versus?
There's an at-risk add-on that has been included in, but that money also flows through the LCI. So any money that we would get for the at-risk add-on takes an 80% haircut, and you get 20%.
Who designates?
It's formulaic through the Virginia Department of Education.
No, I mean, who designates kids with special need versus, is that something done by us? Is it something done by a third party? How is that assessed?
We designate students through a process whether or not they're special education. We designate students as ESOL students based on their scores on the WIDA assessment. And then students in poverty are looked at through the free and reduced lunch program. So it's a federal guideline. It's transmitted to the state, and then that becomes part of the formula.
Yeah. And what's the lag on that in terms of assessment? It's a funding year.
1 year.
1 year.
Okay.
Are there other questions on that side of the table? I think so. Thank you. Very, very good presentation. Okay. Well, our next item on the agenda is back to budget guidance. I don't know if there's more discussion to be had. I know we've had a fairly thorough discussion on that. Mr. Shields, did you have anything as far as the actual resolution itself is the same one we used from last year, essentially? Is that correct?
And yes, it is. And it was listed last on the agenda because typically the council likes to really discuss on what the council's priorities are in terms of things we discussed earlier, neighborhood traffic calming and walkability and things like that. And so possibly all of our colleagues would want to participate in that discussion. That's why it's last. But I will just note by way of introduction, traditionally what the budget guidance that is of interest to everybody is the way that the phrasing is done. In last year's was in bullet 1 about cost-effective delivery of services, including consolidating services with schools where possible. And bullet 2, the point here being maintaining discipline on operating budgets to create financial capacity for the major capital projects, including the high school, Henry Riley Stubbs Library, and the City Hall projects. And then third, the way it was phrased last year is that the operating budget should not exceed organic revenue growth and not require an increase in the real estate tax rate. And then from there, they are typically ones that are kind of focused on general government operations, but those top 3 are ones that the school board and the city council have discussed together in the past, although this is the city council's budget guidance. So I'll start with those, just a discussion of those. The bullets 4 through 12, just really quickly address compliance with financial policies. Bullet 5, calling for multi-year revenue and expenditure projections. Bullet 6, addressing competitive employee compensation. Bullet 7, addressing vibrant, attractive, and walkable business districts, and options for funding neighborhood traffic calming program on a sustained basis. Bullet 8 stands for integrity with the past adopted CIPs. Bullet 9, making effective use of